Kneeling on the cold floor, a girl tries to hold the cloth as the weight of her baby brother makes her bend silently. Under the cruel gaze of the stepmother, every tear that falls is punished like a crime. But what seemed like just another day of pain changes forever when the father, without warning, opens the door and sees the truth. If this beautiful story of resilience and love touched you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you're watching us. The cloth slipped from Isabella's small hands as she tried to keep her balance. The bucket of soapy water beside her was already half empty, and her back ached with the weight of her baby brother Luke, who dozed, tied in an old scarf. She was only 8 years old, but her eyes carried a weariness that didn't belong to childhood. The apartment in West London, which had once been full of colours and laughter, now seemed grey and cold, even under the strong sun that streamed through the curtainless windows. Isabella scrubbed the living room floor for the third time that morning. Her hands were red, and her fingers trembled from the effort. Luke whined softly, but she couldn't stop. Veronica was there, sitting on the leather sofa that had once belonged to her mother, observing every move with those dark, calculating eyes. The woman ate grapes slowly, chewing with pleasure, and every now and then she spat the skins and seeds directly onto the floor Isabella had just cleaned. The dry sound of the skins falling on the floor made the girl's heart clench. She knew what would come next. She would have to clean it all again, and as many times as Veronica wished. The stepmother smiled with satisfaction each time she saw the girl bend down to pick up another skin, another seed. It was as if she fed on something invisible that emanated from the child's suffering. "Isabella, you forgot this corner here." Veronica's voice was sweet like spoiled honey, full of false concern. "How are you going to learn to take care of a house if you can't even do this properly? Your mother must be looking down on you from wherever she is, feeling so much shame." The girl swallowed the cry that wanted to escape. She had learned in recent months that crying only made things worse. Veronica hated tears, saying they were signs of weakness and manipulation. Isabella wet the cloth again, squeezed it hard, and returned to the corner the stepmother had pointed out. Luke moaned on her back, probably hungry again. She needed to finish quickly so she could warm the leftover milk in the fridge. The apartment had 3 bedrooms, but Isabella slept in the smallest one, a kind of pantry that Veronica had transformed into her bedroom as soon as she arrived. The room that had been hers before, large and full of toys, now belonged to the stepmother, who had said she needed space for her things. Isabella didn't complain. She never complained. She had learned it was better to be quiet, do as she was told, and hope her father would return soon from his trip. Richard Miller was a successful export businessman. He traveled constantly to the north, the south, and even to other countries, closing important deals. After his wife Amanda suddenly passed away 2 years ago, leaving him with a baby of a few months and a 6-year-old girl, Richard immersed himself in work as a way to cope with the pain. That's how he met Veronica, at a corporate event in New York City. She was a secretary for a business partner, elegant, charming, and very attentive. She said she understood his pain, as she too had lost someone dear. 6 months later, they married. Veronica promised to care for the children as if they were her own, and Richard, tired and lonely, believed every word. The woman was sweet and affectionate when he was present, called Isabella my little girl, and sang Luke to sleep. But as soon as the door closed and Richard left for another trip, another Veronica emerged, as if taking off a mask. At first it was small things. Isabella had to tidy her own room before breakfast. Then she started tidying the living room too. Then the kitchen. In a short time, all the housework was the girl's responsibility. Veronica said she was teaching responsibility, preparing her for life. When Richard called, she staged the perfect stepmother, hugged Isabella and whispered threats softly in case the girl said anything wrong on the phone. Isabella tried to tell her father once, in the beginning. She said she was tired, that Veronica made her work too much. Richard frowned, but Veronica, with tears in her eyes, explained that she only asked Isabella to put away her own toys and that the girl was having difficulty accepting a new mother. The father looked at his daughter with disappointment, asked her to be kinder to Veronica, and Isabella never tried to talk about it again. The stepmother made sure that if she tried again, Luke's milk would run out, and the girl knew she kept her threats. The baby on Isabella's back began to cry louder. Luke was 1 year and 3 months old, but he was too small and light for his age. He ate little because there was little to eat. Veronica prepared hearty meals for herself, but for the children there was only the bare minimum. Rice, beans when available, and milk that always seemed to be running low. The woman said she couldn't spend too much, that Richard didn't leave enough money, but Isabella had seen the golden credit card in the stepmother's expensive purse, had seen the new clothes that arrived almost every week. "Can I give Luke some milk?" Isabella's voice came out weak, almost a whisper. Veronica looked up, feigning surprise. "Already? But you just gave him some a few hours ago. This boy is very whiny, Isabella. You need to raise him better. If you keep feeding him every time he cries, you'll raise a weak and dependent adult." "But he's hungry." "Hungry?" The stepmother laughed, a sharp sound that echoed through the room. "You don't know what real hunger is, spoiled girl. Finish cleaning this room first. Then you can warm up a little milk for him, just a little, understand? It needs to last until your father sends more money." Isabella lowered her head and went back to scrubbing the floor. Tears began to fall onto the wet floor, mixing with the water and soap. Luke was crying loudly now, and she felt his tiny body struggling on her back, hungry and uncomfortable. Her own arms ached so much she could barely hold the cloth. Her muscles burned, and she felt dizzy from having eaten almost nothing for breakfast. Veronica always served a full plate for herself and a slice of bread with butter for Isabella, saying that children didn't need as much food as adults. The girl thought of her mother. Amanda had been a cheerful, vibrant woman who worked as a music teacher and filled the house with melodies. Isabella remembered her mother singing while preparing dinner, dancing around the living room with her in her arms. She remembered the smell of chocolate cake on Sundays and bedtime stories. All of it seemed to disappear when Amanda left so suddenly, leaving an emptiness that Isabella, even so small, felt every day. And now, with Veronica there, even the good memories seemed to be tainted. "You're taking too long," the stepmother's voice cut through her thoughts. "I'm going out to meet some friends. When I come back, I want this house spotless. And don't give all the milk to that crying boy, do you hear me?" "Yes, ma'am." Veronica stood up, grabbed her designer bag, and slammed the door. The sound echoed through the empty apartment. Isabella waited a few seconds, making sure. The woman had really left, and then allowed herself to collapse onto the floor. Luke was crying desperately now. She carefully took her little brother off her back, settled him on the sofa, and ran to the kitchen. The refrigerator was almost empty. There were some fruits for Veronica, a piece of cheese, and at the back, the half-empty milk carton. Isabella took the carton with trembling hands, warmed a little in the microwave as the stepmother had taught, tested the temperature on her wrist, and took it to Luke. The baby grabbed the bottle desperately, sucking hard. Isabella sat beside him on the sofa, stroking her brother's fine, dark hair. "I'm sorry, Luke. I'm sorry you're hungry. I tried to give it to you earlier, but she wouldn't let me." The baby didn't understand the words, but he seemed to calm down with his sister's voice. Isabella hummed softly one of the songs their mother used to sing, a gentle melody about stars and dreams. Luke drank every last drop and then yawned, his little eyes finally relaxing. Isabella cradled him in her arms, even though her own arms ached, and waited until he was completely asleep. When she finally managed to put Luke in the improvised crib in the pantry room, Isabella returned to the living room. The house was still a mess, at least in Veronica's eyes. She picked up the cloth again and continued cleaning. Hours passed. The sun entering through the windows shifted position, casting different shadows on the walls. Isabella cleaned the living room, the kitchen, the bathroom, the hallway. Her hands were raw, and she could barely feel her fingers. When Veronica returned, it was already late afternoon. The woman entered with several shopping bags, new clothes that barely fit in the designer bags. She looked around, inspecting every corner with critical eyes. Isabella was in the kitchen, finishing drying the last pot. The girl's heart beat fast, awaiting approval or, more likely, criticism. Veronica walked slowly through the house, running her finger over surfaces, opening cabinets, checking every detail. Finally, she returned to the kitchen and smiled. But it wasn't a gentle smile. It was the smile of someone who had found exactly what she was looking for. "Isabella, come here." The girl approached, head bowed. "Look at me when I talk to you." Isabella raised her eyes, meeting the stepmother's cold gaze. "Do you think you did a good job today?" "I tried my best." "Tried?" Veronica laughed. "Then come with me. I want to show you something." The woman led her to the bathroom and pointed to the toilet. There was a small, almost invisible stain on the bottom. Isabella hadn't even seen it. Veronica crossed her arms. "Is this your best? Is this what you call clean?" "I didn't see it. I'm sorry. I can clean it again." "Of course you'll clean it again. And you'll clean everything again. The whole house. Because if you can't do it right the first time, then you need to do it until you learn. But I already cleaned everything today. I'm very tired." "Tired?" Veronica tilted her head, feigning concern. "You're a child, Isabella. Children don't get tired. Children have plenty of energy. Or are you getting lazy? Is that it? Are you turning into a lazy person like your mother was?" "My mother wasn't lazy." The words came out before Isabella could control herself. It was a whisper, but Veronica heard perfectly. The woman's face changed, hardened. She took a step forward. "What did you say?" Isabella recoiled, regretting it. "Nothing. I didn't say anything. Don't lie to me. Are you defending that woman? The one who abandoned you and left you and that crying baby behind? She didn't love you, Isabella. If she did, she wouldn't have left. But I'm here, I stayed, and you treat me with disrespect. I'm sorry. Sorry won't help. You're going to clean this entire house again now, and you won't eat anything until you finish. You need to learn that actions have consequences." Isabella felt tears well up, but she held them back fiercely. Veronica was still there, watching, waiting for a reaction. The girl just nodded and returned to the living room, picked up the bucket and cloth and started all over again. Every movement was agony. Her arms begged for rest. Her stomach rumbled with hunger, but she continued. She had no choice. Outside, the city lights began to turn on. London prepared for the night, with its incessant traffic and its millions of stories. But inside that apartment, time seemed to have stopped. Isabella scrubbed the floor in the dim light, with only the yellowish light from the kitchen partially illuminating the living room. Luke slept in the bedroom, oblivious to his sister's suffering, and Veronica, sitting on her leather throne, ate more fruit and threw the peels on the clean floor, smiling to herself. The night would be long, and the girl's suffering was just beginning. Days dragged on like weeks for Isabella. Each morning began the same way, waking before sunrise, preparing coffee for Veronica, cleaning the kitchen, bathing Luke, changing his diapers, and then beginning the cleaning marathon that extended into the night. The girl had lost weight. Her clothes hung loose on her thin body, and deep dark circles marked her childish face. But the worst was not the physical exhaustion. It was the constant fear, the feeling that it was never enough, that any mistake could unleash the stepmother's silent, calculated fury. Veronica was an artist of disguised cruelty. She never raised her voice too loud, never left visible marks. Her violence was psychological, carefully calibrated to break the spirit without leaving evidence. She knew exactly what to say to make Isabella feel small, useless, guilty for simply existing. And the girl, so young and already so tired, began to believe the poisonous words she heard every day. That Thursday, the phone rang at 7 in the evening. Isabella's heart skipped a beat. It was the time her father usually called. Veronica answered with the melodious voice she reserved for Richard, full of false affection and manufactured concern. "My love, I miss you. How's the trip going?" "The children are great, yes. Isabella is right here beside me. Do you want to talk to her?" The stepmother held out the phone to the girl, but before Isabella could take it, Veronica covered the microphone with her hand and whispered a threat, so low that only Isabella could hear. "Be careful what you say. Remember what happens if you complain." Isabella took the phone with trembling hands. "Hi, Dad." Richard's voice sounded warm on the other end of the line, full of that paternal guilt he tried to compensate with words. "My princess, how are you? Are you taking good care of your little brother?" "I am, Dad. Luke is fine." The girl swallowed the cry that wanted to escape. "We're both fine. And Veronica? Is she treating you well?" Isabella felt the stepmother's gaze fixed on her, those dark eyes that seemed to read every thought. "Yes, Dad, she takes very good care of us." "That's good, sweetheart. I knew I could trust her. Dad is working very hard here in Manchester, but as soon as I close this contract, I'll be home. I promise we'll spend the weekend together." We can go to the park, how about that? You, me, Luke, and Veronica. That would be great, Dad. I love you very much, Princess. Never forget that. I love you too, Dad. The call ended and Isabella returned the phone to Veronica. The woman smiled, satisfied. Very good, Isabella. You're learning. See how easy it is to make your father happy? He just wants to know that everything is fine here. No need to worry him with trifles, right? The girl nodded in silence. Veronica stroked Isabella's hair with a false tenderness that made the girl's skin crawl. It was the touch of a predator, not a mother. Now go bathe Luke, he smells. And then I want you to organize the closet in his room. It's all a mess. Isabella went to the room where Luke was playing with an old toy, a plastic car that had been hers years ago. The baby smiled when he saw his sister, reaching out his little arms. She picked him up, feeling her little brother's too light weight, and took him to the bathroom. As she filled the tub with warm water, she hummed softly, trying to bring a little normality to that moment. Luke loved baths. He laughed and splashed his little hands in the water, spraying everything around. Isabella smiled for the first time that day, momentarily forgetting her tiredness and fear. Those minutes with her brother were her refuge, the only time she could remember that she was still a child, that life hadn't always been like this. You'll grow up strong. Luke, she whispered as she soaped the baby's fine hair. You'll be big and strong and you'll protect me when you grow up, won't you? The baby laughed, not understanding the words but reacting to his sister's affectionate tone. Isabella dried him carefully, dressed him in his mended pajamas and took him back to the room. She put him in the crib, gave him the worn teddy bear that was the only toy Veronica hadn't thrown away, and waited until he began to close his eyes. But before Luke fell completely asleep, Veronica appeared at the door. Isabella, you forgot to clean the bathroom. There's water all over the floor. I'll clean it now. You always forget things, don't you? Always so sloppy. Your mother was like that too. Never did anything right. Isabella bit her lip, holding back anger and sadness. There was no point in defending her mother. She had tried once and only made things worse. She walked past the stepmother and returned to the bathroom, picked up the cloth and began to dry the wet floor. Every movement seemed to echo through the empty corridors of that apartment that had once been a home. When she finally finished all the chores, it was past midnight. Isabella dragged herself to the small pantry room, where a thin mattress on the floor served as a bed. There weren't enough blankets and the night was cold. She curled up as best she could, hugging herself, and tried to sleep. But sleep didn't come easily. Her stomach rumbled with hunger. Veronica had said she didn't deserve dinner because she had spilled a little water on the floor during Luke's bath. Isabella thought of her father, how happy he seemed on the phone, so relieved to believe that everything was fine. Part of her wanted to scream the truth, tell everything that was happening. But another part, the part that had grown in these months under Veronica's control, was too afraid. What if her father didn't believe her? What if he thought she was making up stories for attention? What if Veronica carried out her threat and Luke went without food? The tears finally came, wetting the thin pillow. Isabella cried in silence, as she had learned to do, without making a sound so as not to wake anyone. She cried for her lost childhood, for the mother who was gone, for the father who was too far away to see the truth. She cried until exhaustion won and sleep finally arrived. The next morning, Isabella woke to Luke crying. It was still very early, the sun barely beginning to lighten the London sky. She dragged herself to the crib and picked up her brother. He was wet and hungry. Isabella changed his diaper with the automatic movements of someone who had done it 1,000 times, and then went to the kitchen to prepare a bottle. But when she opened the refrigerator, her heart sank. The milk carton was empty, completely empty, and there were no more on the shelf. Isabella felt panic rise in her throat. Luke was crying louder now, desperate with hunger. She searched the cupboards behind packages and cans, but there was no milk anywhere. With her heart pounding, Isabella gently knocked on Veronica's bedroom door. There was no answer. She knocked a little harder. Finally, the stepmother's irritated voice echoed from the other side. "What is it?" "Veronica, there's no more milk for Luke." There was a long pause. Then the door opened, revealing the woman in her silk robe, hair loose and furious expression. "And what do you want me to do?" "It's 6 in the morning, Isabella. But Luke is hungry. He needs to feed." "Then give him something else. Make him some cornstarch porridge." There's no cornstarch either. Veronica sighed dramatically as if it were the biggest inconvenience in the world. Then give him sugar water. It will have to do until I can go to the market. But he's too small, he needs milk. Veronica's gaze hardened. Isabella, are you questioning my decisions? You, an 8-year-old child, think you know more than me about how to care for a baby. No, Just what? Do you think I'm a bad stepmother? Is that it? Do you think I don't take care of you? It's not that. Then go do as I told you. Sugar water, and stop waking me up early with your complaints. Your father left me in charge here and you will obey. Veronica slammed the door in Isabella's face. The girl stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of her brother in her arms and helplessness tightening her chest. Luke cried desperately. She went back to the kitchen, prepared the sugar water as the stepmother had ordered, and tried to give it to the baby. But Luke spat it out, refusing the strange liquid. He wanted milk. He needed milk. Isabella sat on the kitchen floor with Luke in her lap and simply cradled him as he cried. She sang all the songs she could remember from her mother, stroked his hair, but nothing calmed the baby's hunger. Hours dragged on. Veronica finally left her room at 10 in the morning, already dressed and perfumed, ready to go out. I'm going to the supermarket and then I have lunch with friends, she announced, grabbing her expensive purse. I should only be back in the afternoon. Isabella, I want this apartment spotless when I return. And take care of that crying boy. He's giving me a headache. The door slammed and Isabella was left alone with Luke. The baby was still crying, weaker now, tired from so much effort. Isabella looked around, desperate. She had to do something. She couldn't let her little brother go hungry like this. That's when she remembered the neighbor in the apartment next door, Mrs. Celeste, an elderly lady who had always been kind to the children before Veronica arrived. Maybe she could help. With a pounding heart, Isabella picked up Luke in her arms and went out into the hallway. She knocked on the neighbor's door, hoping she was home. The door opened, and Mrs. Celeste appeared in her floral apron and a gentle smile. Isabella? What a surprise. It's been so long. How are you, dear? Mrs. Celeste, the girl began, and her voice trembled. Please, do you have some milk? Luke is very hungry and there's no more milk at home. The neighbor frowned, concerned. Of course I do, my dear. Come in, come in. She looked at the baby in Isabella's arms, and her expression became even more worried. But where is your stepmother? She went out. To the market. Mrs. Celeste took Luke in her arms and felt the baby's light weight. Her eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. She just led Isabella inside, prepared a warm bottle of milk and gave it to the baby. Luke sucked desperately, and the neighbor watched with an expression of sadness and contained anger. Isabella, the lady began, choosing her words carefully. How are things at home? Is your father still traveling a lot? He is. He calls almost every day, but he's always far away. And Veronica? Does she take good care of you? Isabella hesitated. The stepmother's threat echoed in her mind. But Mrs. Celeste was so kind, and she was so tired of carrying everything alone. She does, she lied, because fear was stronger than the desire to tell the truth. Mrs. Celeste didn't seem convinced, but she didn't insist. She gave Isabella a packet of powdered milk, some biscuits, and a fruit. Take this home. And if you need anything at all, you come to me, okay? Thank you, Mrs. Celeste. Back in the apartment, Isabella put the powdered milk in the cupboard, hidden behind other things so Veronica wouldn't see it immediately. She gave Luke another bottle, and he finally calmed down and fell asleep, exhausted. Then she began to clean the house, because she knew that if she didn't, the stepmother would find another reason to punish her. When Veronica returned in the afternoon, laden with bags of new clothes but no supermarket bags, Isabella understood that the woman had never intended to buy food. It was just another form of torment, another way to show power. The stepmother inspected the house, found imaginary flaws, and made Isabella clean everything again. And so the days continued one after another in an endless cycle of work, hunger, and fear. Isabella shrank inside, losing pieces of herself with each passing day. But somewhere deep down a small flame of hope still flickered, the hope that one day her father would return and finally see the truth. The hope that one day she and Luke could just be children again, without the weight of the world on their shoulders. It was this tiny flame that kept her going, that made her continue, even when everything within her wanted to give up. Weeks passed and the situation only worsened. Veronica became bolder in her cruelty, confident that Richard was too far away to discover anything. The woman had started receiving frequent visits from a man named Maurice, whom she introduced as a cousin, but the way they looked at each other and laughed together suggested something very different. Isabella observed everything in silence, storing the information without knowing exactly what to do with it. Maurice was different from Richard in every way. While Isabella's father was a serious man, dedicated to work and responsibilities, Maurice seemed to live a life of pleasure and superficiality. He wore expensive clothes, drove imported cars that he parked in the building's garage, and spoke loudly about dubious business dealings. When he visited, Veronica would send Isabella to her room with Luke, locking them in with the excuse that the children needed routine and rest time. But Isabella heard the conversations through the thin door. She heard Veronica laughing loudly, something she never did when Richard was present. She heard them talking about money, about investments, about a luxurious life they planned to have. And one of those afternoons, Isabella heard something that made her blood run cold. "How much longer do you think it will take?" It was Maurice's voice, deep and calculating. "Not much longer," Veronica replied with that false sweetness she used when she wanted something. "He trusts me completely. I already have access to several accounts. I just need to wait for the right moment. And the children. The children are a nuisance but useful. He'll never leave me as long as he thinks I'm taking care of his little ones. And then we'll find a solution." Isabella felt a chill down her spine. She didn't fully understand what that meant, but she knew it was something bad, something dangerous. She hugged Luke tighter, as if to protect him from a threat she couldn't yet name. The next day, Richard called again. It was Friday, and he had promised to be home on Sunday to spend the weekend with the family. Isabella felt a wave of relief mixed with fear. What if her father really came? What if she could talk to him alone? But what if Veronica found out? The stepmother was especially nervous that day. She paced back and forth, talking on the phone in a low voice, making plans. Isabella pretended not to pay attention, but her ears were alert to every word. Veronica was organizing something, preparing something for Richard's arrival. On Saturday morning, Veronica woke Isabella before dawn. The woman had a strange expression, half anxious, half determined. "Today we're going to do a complete cleaning of this house," she announced. "Your father arrives tomorrow, and I want everything perfect. He needs to see that I took very good care of you." And then began the most exhausting marathon Isabella had ever faced. Veronica made her clean every room 3 times, wash all the clothes, organize all the closets, polish every surface until it shone. Luke was practically ignored all day, crying in his crib, while Isabella ran back and forth trying to do everything. The stepmother prepared an endless list of tasks, and each one had to be executed perfectly. But there was something different that day. Veronica was buying things. She filled the refrigerator with food, bought milk, fruits, vegetables. She prepared Isabella's room with new sheets, put toys in the living room, bought new clothes for the children. She was setting a scene, creating the illusion of a happy, well-cared-for home, and Isabella realized with sadness that it was all just that, an illusion to deceive Richard. At night, when she finally finished all the tasks, Isabella collapsed onto the bed. Every muscle in her body ached, and she could barely keep her eyes open. But before she fell asleep, Veronica entered the room and sat on the edge of the thin mattress. "Isabella, listen carefully to what I'm going to say." The stepmother's voice was low and threatening. "Your father arrives tomorrow, and you're going to be a good girl. You're going to smile. You're going to say everything is great. You're going to show how happy you are. If you do anything to ruin this, if you say any nonsense, I promise you will regret it. And it's not just you who will suffer. Think about Luke. He's so small, so fragile. It would be a shame if something happened to him because you couldn't keep quiet." Isabella's heart pounded. "I won't say anything." "Good, and one more thing. Your father is planning a surprise for you. He wants to take all of us out to dinner tomorrow night, at a fancy restaurant, so you're going to behave like a well-mannered girl. You're going to wear the new dress I bought for you. You're going to smile at people, and you're going to make your father proud. Understand?" "Yes." Veronica stood up, but before leaving, she turned once more. "Oh, and Isabella, remember that I can also be very kind when people obey me. If you do everything right tomorrow, who knows, maybe I'll let you have dessert." maybe even ice cream. You'd like that, wouldn't you? The girl nodded, even though she knew it was just another manipulation, another form of control. Veronica left, and Isabella was left alone in the darkness with the weight of the threats crushing her chest. She wanted so badly to tell her father the truth, but the fear was paralyzing. What if Veronica carried out her threats? What if something happened to Luke? Sunday dawned sunny. Isabella woke with butterflies in her stomach, a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. She bathed Luke, dressed him in the new outfit Veronica had bought, and then put on her own dress, a light blue one with a white bow that was pretty but uncomfortable. Veronica inspected the two children as if they were soldiers before a military parade, adjusted the bow on Isabella's dress, combed the girl's hair, and applied a little perfume. "Perfect," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Now you look like children of someone important." Richard arrived around noon, and when the door opened, Isabella felt like running and throwing herself into her father's arms. But Veronica was there, and the stepmother's hand rested on Isabella's shoulder, a subtle but clear pressure. The girl stayed where she was, just smiling. "My princesses." Richard entered with open arms, his briefcase falling to the floor as he knelt to hug the children. Isabella allowed herself that moment, burying her face in her father's chest, feeling the familiar scent of his cologne. Luke, who already recognized his father, smiled and extended his little arms. Richard picked him up and spun him in the air, making the baby laugh. "My love," Veronica approached, all elegant in her new dress. "So glad you're here. I missed you so much." "The children were also anxious, weren't they, Isabella?" "We were, Dad." Isabella's voice came out automatically, trained by weeks of fear. Richard looked around the apartment, impressed. "Wow, how organized and clean everything is. Veronica, you did an amazing job here, and the children look so well cared for." "I do what I can," Veronica replied modestly. "Isabella has helped me a lot. She's such a responsible girl, so mature for her age. Sometimes I even worry. I think she tries too hard to be perfect." Richard stroked his daughter's hair, proud. "Is that true, Princess? Are you helping Veronica with the housework?" Isabella nodded, unable to find the words. Her father seemed so happy, so relieved. How could she destroy that? How could she wipe that smile off his face? "But she's just a child," Richard continued, looking at Veronica. "You're not overdoing the chores, are you?" "Not at all." Veronica laughed, that musical, false laugh. "She just puts away her toys and helps me take care of Luke once in a while. Child's play. The rest I do myself, of course." The lie was so blatant that Isabella felt nauseous, but she remained silent, Veronica's warning echoing in her mind. The day passed in a strange haze. Richard played with the children, told stories about his trip, brought presents. For Isabella, a fairy tale book. For Luke, a new teddy bear. For Veronica, an expensive piece of jewelry that she pretended to adore, but which Isabella knew would be sold as soon as possible. The stepmother was all smiles and affection, prepared a delicious lunch, served the food as if she were the perfect wife and mother. In the evening, as promised, they went out to dinner. The restaurant was elegant, with white tablecloths and waiters in suits. Isabella had never been to a place like that. Veronica ordered the most expensive dishes on the menu, imported wine, and talked animatedly about what it had been like to care for the children, how well they were growing, how rewarding it was to be a mother. Isabella ate in silence, observing the stepmother's performance. It was fascinating and terrifying at the same time. Veronica was so convincing, so natural in her lies, and Richard believed every word, smiled at her with adoration, held her hand across the table. At one point, when Veronica went to the restroom, Richard leaned over to Isabella. "Sweetheart, I know it's not easy to have a new person at home. I know you still miss your mother. I miss her too. But Veronica is a good person, and she's trying very hard to make you happy. You can see that, can't you?" Isabella looked at her father, at those tired eyes full of hope. "I can, Dad. Good, because I need to know that you're okay when I'm traveling. I need to be sure that I left you in good hands." The words were like knives in Isabella's heart. She wanted to scream that no, they were not in good hands, that everything was a lie. But fear silenced her, and she just smiled and nodded. Veronica returned from the restroom and dinner continued. When they finally returned home, it was late. Richard put Luke to sleep, and then took Isabella to her room. He sat on the edge of the bed and hugged his daughter. "I love you very much, Princess. Never forget that. And if you ever need me, you can call me anytime. No matter where I am, I'll always be here for you." "I know, Dad. I love you too." Richard kissed his daughter's forehead and left. Isabella lay there, listening to the sounds of the apartment. She heard her father and Veronica talking softly in the living room, heard laughter, heard the television being turned on. And then later she heard something she shouldn't have heard. Veronica's voice on the phone, low but clear. He believed everything she was saying with that poisonous satisfaction. "It's so easy to fool him. Just a few more weeks, Morris. Just a little more and we'll have everything. The money, the house, everything. And then we can get rid of this burden." Isabella covered her ears, but it was too late. She had heard. And now she knew with absolute certainty that Veronica was planning something terrible. Something that would put everything at risk. She needed to find a way to tell her father the truth. But how? And when? Time was running out, and Isabella could feel the storm approaching, inevitable and devastating. Richard left on Monday morning, promising to return in 2 weeks. No sooner had the door closed behind him than Veronica's mask fell like a heavy cloth. She looked at Isabella with cold, calculating eyes, and the girl knew she would pay dearly for the weekend's charade. "You did well," Veronica said, but there was something sinister in her tone. "But now that your daddy's gone, things go back to normal. And since you behave so well, I'm going to give you a present. Today you're going to clean the whole house twice, so you don't forget your place here." The weeks that followed were even more difficult than the previous ones. Veronica seemed to be in a hurry now, anxious, nervous. Maurice visited almost every day, and they spent hours locked in the bedroom, speaking in low voices about papers, signatures, bank transfers. Isabella heard fragments of conversations she didn't fully understand, but which filled her with dread. "Has she signed the power of attorney yet?" Maurice would ask. "Not yet, but she will soon." "I'm working on it," Veronica would reply. "It needs to be quick. The longer it takes, the greater the risk." "I know that." Veronica's voice sounded irritated. "Do you think it's easy?" "He's not a complete idiot. I need to choose the right moment." Isabella didn't know what a power of attorney was, but she understood it had something to do with money, with her father's accounts. And she knew from the tone of their voices that it was something her father would not approve of if he knew. One afternoon, while cleaning Veronica's room, Isabella found an envelope hidden under the mattress. She didn't want to snoop, but something made her open it. Inside were documents with Richard's name, bank letterhead, and a list of numbers that looked like monetary values. There were also photos, some of her father with Veronica in happy moments, but others were strange, showing Richard in situations that seemed compromising, although Isabella didn't quite understand what they meant. She quickly returned everything to the envelope, her heart pounding, but the image of those documents remained etched in her mind. Luke was getting weaker every day. Even with the milk Mrs. Celeste secretly provided, it wasn't enough. The baby needed proper food, medical care, attention. But Veronica simply ignored his needs. She said he was just being whiny, that children cried for anything. Isabella tried to compensate, giving all her own food to her brother when Veronica wasn't looking, cradling him all night when he couldn't sleep from hunger and discomfort. It was on a Thursday that everything began to unravel. Isabella woke to Luke coughing. It wasn't a normal cold cough. It was deep, hoarse, and the baby seemed to have difficulty breathing. His little face was red, and when Isabella touched his forehead, she felt it was too hot. "Veronica, Luke has a high fever." Isabella ran to the living room where the stepmother was having coffee. "Please, I think he needs to see a doctor." Veronica barely looked up. "It's just a cold. Give him a lukewarm bath. But he's very hot, and he's coughing a lot." "Isabella, you're being dramatic. Children get sick all the time. It's normal. It will pass." The girl returned to the room with a heavy heart. Luke continued to cough and now began to moan in pain. Isabella did what she could, gave him a lukewarm bath, tried to make him drink water, sang to calm him. But throughout the day, the baby's condition only worsened. The fever rose, he refused even milk, and that horrible cough wouldn't stop. That night, when Luke began to have real difficulty breathing, Isabella panicked. She ran to Veronica, who was on the phone with Maurice, laughing at something he had said. "Veronica, please. Luke can't breathe properly. He needs help." The stepmother covered the phone and looked at Isabella with irritation. "I already told you it's just a cold. Stop bothering me. But he's very ill. Then give him the cough syrup in the kitchen cabinet." "I already did. It's not helping." Veronica sighed dramatically. "Isabella, you're so exaggerated. Always making drama for nothing. Your father will call soon, and I'm not going to let you worry him with these trifles. Go take care of your brother and leave me alone." Isabella returned to the room desperate. Luke was pale now, his lips almost purple, and each breath seemed an enormous effort. She picked up the baby and did the only thing she could think of. She went to the apartment door, opened it carefully so as not to make a sound, and ran to Mrs. Celeste's apartment. The neighbor opened the door and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. "My goodness, this boy needs a doctor now." She picked up the phone and called an ambulance, then took Luke in her arms and began to apply cold compresses while they waited. "Isabella, you need to tell me the truth now," Mrs. Celeste said, looking into the girl's eyes. "What's going on in that house? Why is this baby so neglected?" The tears finally came. Isabella couldn't hold them back anymore. She told everything. The excessive work, the lack of food, Veronica's threats, the constant fear. The words poured out in a torrent, years of pain and silence finally finding a voice. Mrs. Celeste listened with an increasingly horrified and furious expression. The ambulance arrived quickly. 2 paramedics entered, examined Luke and confirmed that he needed to be taken to the hospital immediately. They were preparing the baby for transport when Veronica appeared at the door, her face a mask of false concern. "What's going on here?" "Isabella, what did you do?" She tried to take Luke from the paramedic's arms. "Are you the mother?" the paramedic asked. "I'm the stepmother. I take care of these children. This baby is severely dehydrated and showing signs of malnutrition," the paramedic said bluntly. "How long has he been like this?" "Malnutrition?" Veronica's eyes widened. The perfect actress. "That's impossible. I take very good care of him. It must be some health problem. Maybe some illness." Isabella saw the lie forming, saw Veronica building her defense. But before she could do anything, Mrs. Celeste stepped forward. "This woman is lying," the neighbor said firmly. "I've been giving this baby milk for weeks because the girl came begging for help. And look at her," she pointed to Isabella. "This child is skin and bones. Someone needs to call social services." "How dare you?" Veronica lunged at the neighbor, but the paramedic held her back. "Ma'am, you'll have to come with us to the hospital. And yes, we will notify the competent authorities. This is a serious case." "I need to call the children's father," Veronica said, already picking up the phone. "He'll clarify everything. He'll say I took very good care of his children." But when she dialed, Richard didn't answer. He was in an important meeting, his cell phone on silent. Veronica called several times, left urgent messages, but there was no response. And meanwhile, Luke was taken in the ambulance with Isabella beside him and Mrs. Celeste following behind in her own car. At the hospital, Luke was immediately admitted. Doctors ran tests, took blood, took x-rays. Isabella waited in the hallway, trembling with fear and cold, still wearing only the thin pajamas she had left home in. Mrs. Celeste hugged her, trying to comfort her, but the girl couldn't stop crying. Veronica paced back and forth, desperately trying to reach Richard, but her husband's phone remained silent. She tried to talk to the doctors, to explain that it was all a misunderstanding, that she took very good care of the children, but the doctors looked at her with suspicion, especially after examining Isabella and finding marks of excessive effort on the girl's hands, malnutrition and clear signs of neglect. A social worker was called. She spoke with Isabella in a private room, asking gentle but direct questions. And for the first time, without Veronica nearby to threaten her, Isabella told everything. Every detail, every humiliation, every day of hunger and forced labor. The social worker wrote everything down, and her face grew more serious with each word. When they finally managed to reach Richard, it was almost midnight. He was staying in Washington, D.C., in a meeting that had run late. When he answered the phone and heard that Luke was hospitalized, he became desperate. "I'm coming to London now. It doesn't matter if I have to charter a private plane. I'll be there in a few hours. How did this happen? How did my son get like this?" Veronica tried to grab the phone to talk to him, to give her version of events, but the social worker didn't allow it. She first spoke with Richard, explained the situation, told him what Isabella had reported. On the other end of the line, Richard was silent for a long moment. Then his voice returned, different now, cold and controlled. "Keep Veronica away from my children. I'll be there and I'll sort this out, and I want all necessary authorities to be involved. I want a full investigation." The stepmother, who was close enough to hear, turned pale. She tried to argue, said it was all lies from a resentful child who wouldn't accept a new mother, but no one was believing her anymore. The mask had completely fallen, and now everyone could see the real Veronica. Not the dedicated wife she pretended to be, but the cruel, greedy manipulator she had always been. While they waited for Richard to arrive, Isabella stayed in the hospital room next to Luke. The baby was sleeping now, connected to IVs and monitors, but his breathing was more stable. Mrs. Celeste stayed with them all night, holding Isabella's hand, promising that everything would be all right. And for the first time in months, the girl allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was finally coming to an end. But she didn't know yet that the worst was yet to come, that Veronica wouldn't give up so easily, and that the battle for truth was just beginning. Richard arrived at the hospital in the early hours of the morning, his eyes red with fatigue and worry. He had taken the first available flight, leaving behind important meetings and millionaire contracts. None of that mattered now. His children needed him, and he had failed to protect them. When he entered the room and saw Luke in the hospital bed, so small and fragile, surrounded by medical equipment, his legs almost gave out. But it was when he looked at Isabella, huddled in a chair beside the hospital crib, that he truly understood the extent of his mistake. The girl was too thin, her face pale and tired, her eyes too big for her small face. How had he not seen? How had he been so blind? "Isabella," he whispered, kneeling beside the chair. "Sweetheart, forgive me." The girl looked at her father, and all the emotions she had repressed for months finally overflowed. She threw herself into his arms and cried. She cried for all the times she wanted to ask for help and couldn't. She cried for all the hungry nights, for all the days of exhausting work, for all the fear she had carried alone. And Richard hugged her tightly, his own tears wetting his daughter's hair. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry," he repeated, his voice breaking. "I should have noticed. I should have seen. Dad failed you." Mrs. Celeste watched from the door, giving them privacy in that moment. The social worker was also there, along with a police officer who had been called to document the case. Veronica had been removed. She was in another room being questioned, but everyone knew that was just the beginning. After Isabella had calmed down a little, Richard spoke at length with the doctors. The diagnosis was clear. Luke was severely malnourished and dehydrated, with a serious respiratory infection caused by his weakened immune system. Isabella also showed signs of malnutrition and extreme stress for a child of her age. The doctors were direct. These children had been severely and prolonged neglected. Richard listened to everything in silence, his face hardening with each word. When the doctors finished, he asked to speak with the social worker. In a private room, she showed him the notes from her conversation with Isabella, recounting everything the girl had told her. Richard read each line with growing horror and fury. "How could I have been such an idiot?" he murmured. "She completely fooled me. I believed every lie." "Don't blame yourself so much," the social worker said gently. "People like her are experienced manipulators. They know exactly how to deceive, how to appear perfect. The important thing now is to protect your children and ensure this never happens again." "What do I need to do?" "First, we'll need a full report. The police will investigate. Social services will also be involved. And you'll need a lawyer, both to protect your rights as a father and to deal with the legal consequences of all this." "And Veronica?" "She can no longer have access to the children. A protective order will be requested. And depending on what the investigation uncovers, she could face charges for several crimes." Richard nodded, his determination solidifying. "Do whatever is necessary. I want justice. I want her to pay for everything she did to my children." Meanwhile, in another room, Veronica tried to maintain her composure. She had called Maurice, asking him to find a lawyer, someone who could help her. But Maurice, hearing that the situation had exploded, that the authorities were involved, simply said he couldn't risk it and hung up. Veronica was left alone, her web of lies beginning to unravel. She tried one last time to speak with Richard. She managed to find him in the hospital corridor and ran to him, tears in her eyes. "Richard, please, you need to listen to me. It's not what it seems. I love these children. I tried to take care of them as best I could, but they're difficult, stubborn. Isabella never accepted me, always tried to sabotage me. She made up these stories because she's jealous, because she doesn't want you to be happy with anyone other than her mother." Richard looked at her, and Veronica shivered at the coldness she saw in his eyes. "My son is in a hospital bed, malnourished and sick. My daughter is traumatized, weighing less than she should for her age. And you want me to believe they are to blame?" "But Richard—" "No," he raised his hand, interrupting her. "I don't want to hear any more of your lies. It's over, Veronica. Our marriage is over. You will be held legally accountable for everything you've done. And if it's up to me, you will never get near my children again. You can't do this." Veronica screamed, her composure finally shattering. "I'm your wife." "We're married!" "A marriage based on lies," Richard replied, his voice low and controlled. "You never loved me or the children. You only wanted our money, and I will prove it." He turned and began to walk back to Luke's room, but Veronica followed him, desperate now. "You'll regret this, Richard. You think you're so perfect, but I know things about you. I have photos, documents. I can ruin your reputation." Richard stopped and turned slowly. "Are you threatening me now?" "I'm telling the truth. If you try to destroy me, I'll take you down with me. I'll go to the press. I'll say you abandoned me with 2 difficult children, that you were never home, that you only cared about work. I'll make everyone believe I'm the victim here." A police officer who was nearby approached, hearing the threat. "Ma'am, you need to calm down and come with me. There are some questions we need to ask." Veronica was taken away, but as she walked down the corridor, she screamed threats and accusations. Other patients and visitors stopped to watch, and Richard felt shame burning his cheeks. But it didn't matter. None of that mattered anymore. All that mattered was that his children were safe. In the days that followed, while Luke recovered in the hospital, Richard began to piece together the puzzle. He hired an experienced lawyer, Charles Henry, a middle-aged man known for his tenacity in family law cases. Together, they began to investigate Veronica, and what they discovered was shocking. Veronica had a history. It wasn't the first time she had married a widowed or divorced man, gained his trust, and tried to access his money. There were at least 2 previous cases in other cities. In one of them, the man had discovered in time and managed to divorce. In the other, she had managed to divert a considerable amount before disappearing. Maurice was her long-time accomplice. He helped her set up traps, create false identities when necessary, manipulate documents. The 2 had a relationship. They weren't cousins, as Veronica claimed. They were partners in crime, living off the money they stole from vulnerable men. Charles Henry also discovered that Veronica had already started diverting money from Richard. Small amounts at first, transfers that seemed legitimate, groceries, children's clothes, household expenses, but the receipts were fake, the values inflated. She had accumulated almost £100,000 in a secret account shared with Maurice, and there was more. The documents Isabella had seen hidden were part of a larger plan. Veronica was trying to get Richard to sign a power of attorney that would give her complete access to all his accounts and investments. The compromising photos were fake, edited, prepared to blackmail Richard if he discovered the scheme and wanted to report her. Richard listened to each revelation with a mixture of anger and disbelief. How could he have been so naive? How had he not seen the signs? But Charles Henry reassured him, saying that people like Veronica were professionals, that she had studied Richard, knew exactly which buttons to push, how to exploit his loneliness and his guilt over the loss of his wife. While all this unfolded, Mrs. Celeste also came forward with her own evidence. The neighbor had been worried about the children for some time, and unbeknownst to anyone, had begun to document what she saw through the windows. She had a detailed diary of dates and times when she saw Isabella cleaning the house carrying Luke on her back, being forced to work for hours. She even had some photos taken through the window, showing the girl exhausted, the apartment in disarray before Richard arrived, and Veronica eating heartily while the children barely had anything to eat. "This is gold," Charles said upon seeing the evidence. "With this and Isabella's testimony, we have a solid case. Veronica won't escape. But even with all the evidence accumulating against her, Veronica did not give up. From her home now, as she had been released from the police station with a restraining order not to approach the children, she began to execute her plan B. She called journalists, gossip blogs, telling a distorted version of events. In the reports that began to appear, she painted herself as a dedicated woman who had sacrificed her own life to care for her husband's children. She said that Richard was a workaholic who was never home, that he left the children alone, that she had tried her best in impossible circumstances. She said that Isabella was a manipulative child who had never accepted her and was making up stories to separate her from her father. Headlines began to appear. Businessman abandons dedicated wife and blames sick children, or stepmother unjustly accused by jealous stepdaughter. The narrative was being manipulated, and Richard saw his reputation being destroyed in the media. "We need to act fast," Charles warned. "She's trying to control the narrative. We need to present our version and our evidence before this gets out of control." But Richard hesitated. He didn't want to expose Isabella and Luke to more trauma. He didn't want their story to become entertainment for the public. Charles, however, was firm. If we don't defend ourselves, her version will prevail, and that can affect the legal case as well. It was Isabella who made the decision. The girl who had remained quiet and scared for most of the ordeal asked to speak with her father privately. In the hospital room while Luke slept, she said in a small but determined voice, "Dad, I want to tell the truth. I want everyone to know what she did. Not for revenge, but because there might be other children going through the same thing, and they need to know they can ask for help. That they're not alone." Richard looked at his daughter, at that small but incredibly courageous child, and felt his heart fill with pride and sadness at the same time. "Are you sure, Princess? It will be difficult. People will ask questions, they will judge. Are you ready for that?" Isabella nodded. "I am, but I want it to be in a way that helps other people. I don't just want to complain about Veronica. I want other children to know they can speak up, that they can ask for help." And so began the next phase of the battle, a phase that would bring the truth to newspapers, social media, and courts. A phase where Isabella would show a courage no one imagined an 8-year-old child could have. The nightmare was far from over, but finally, for the first time in a long time, there was hope on the horizon. Charles Henry organized a carefully planned press conference. It would not be sensationalist nor exploit Isabella, but would present the facts clearly and respectfully. Richard would give a brief statement, and the lawyer would present the documentary evidence. Isabella would not need to appear, but her story would be told with dignity. On the appointed day, the law office was crowded with journalists. Cameras and microphones vied for space, and Richard felt the weight of that moment. He wore a discreet suit, no tie, wanting to appear approachable yet serious. Beside him, Charles held a thick folder with all the documents they had collected. Richard began in a firm voice, reading from a prepared paper. "Good morning, everyone. I am here today to clarify a situation that has been distorted in the media in recent days. A few months ago, I entrusted the care of my children to a person I believed to be honest and dedicated. I was mistaken. My children, Isabella, 8 years old, and Luke, 1 year old, were victims of severe neglect, exploitation, and psychological abuse while I was traveling for work." The room fell into absolute silence. Richard continued, telling the story chronologically. He spoke about how he met Veronica, about her lies, about the discovery at the hospital. His voice wavered when he described the state in which he found Luke, but he composed himself and moved forward. Then Charles Henry took over, presenting the evidence methodically. He showed medical reports proving the children's malnutrition. He presented Mrs. Celeste's diary, with detailed dates and observations. He displayed bank statements showing the diversion of money. He revealed Veronica's history, her previous marriages, her schemes with Maurice, and most impactful of all, he showed the edited photos she had prepared to blackmail Richard, having hired a digital image expert who proved the manipulation. The journalists' questions came in a deluge. Where was Richard when all this was happening? Why did it take so long to find out? Did the children have other relatives who could have helped? Richard answered honestly, accepting his share of the responsibility. "I failed as a father," he said, his voice laden with emotion. "I was so consumed by work, so focused on providing financially for my children after the loss of my wife, that I didn't realize they needed much more than money. They needed my presence, and that absence allowed Veronica to do what she did. I will carry that guilt for the rest of my life. Richard's sincerity seemed to have an impact. The articles that came out that night and in the following days completely changed their tone. They were no longer about a wronged stepmother, but about a grieving father who was deceived by a professional scammer, and about two innocent children who suffered terribly. The change in narrative infuriated Veronica. She gave her own interview to a sensationalist channel, crying profusely, saying that everything was a lie, that Richard was using money and influence to destroy her. But her tears no longer convinced anyone. The facts presented by Charles were too solid, the evidence too irrefutable. Maurice, realizing the ship was sinking, decided to save himself. He approached the police and offered a plea bargain. He would tell everything about Veronica's schemes, about previous scams, about the plans they had for Richard in exchange for a reduced sentence. The police accepted, and Maurice's revelations were devastating for Veronica's defense. While the legal and media battle unfolded, Richard focused on rebuilding his family. Luke was discharged from the hospital after 2 weeks of intensive treatment. The baby was recovering well, gaining weight, and his smile was returning. Isabella also began to improve, both physically and emotionally, although she still had frequent nightmares. Richard decided to make drastic changes in his life. He spoke with his partners and reorganized the company, delegating more responsibilities and limiting his travels to absolutely necessary cases. He hired a nanny, but this time with extensively checked references, and installed security cameras throughout the apartment, not to spy but for peace of mind. More importantly, he was present. He had dinner with the children every night, read stories to them before bed, spent weekends doing simple but important things, like going to the park or simply staying home watching cartoons. Isabella began therapy. The child psychologist, Dr. Marcia, was a kind woman who created a safe space for the girl to process the trauma. In sessions, Isabella talked about the mother she had lost, about the fear she had felt with Veronica, about the guilt of not having been able to protect Luke better. Dr. Marcia helped her understand that nothing that happened was her fault, that she was just a child and had done the best she could in an impossible situation. One day, during a session, Isabella said something that surprised even the experienced therapist. "I think in a way I learned important things. I learned that I can be strong, that I can care for people I love, that I can survive difficult things. I didn't want to go through this, and I will never forget the pain, but I also won't let it destroy me. I want to use what I learned to help other people." Dr. Marcia smiled, impressed by the girl's resilience. "You are very wise for your age, Isabella. But remember that it's also allowed to just be a child. You don't need to be strong all the time." "I know," Isabella replied, "and it's nice to learn to be a child again." Meanwhile, the case against Veronica moved forward in the courts. Based on Isabella's testimony, Mrs. Celeste's statement, medical and documentary evidence, and Maurice's plea bargain, the public prosecutor built a solid case. Veronica was indicted for several crimes: embezzlement, false identity, mistreatment, severe neglect, and attempted extortion. The trial attracted national attention. The courtroom was packed with journalists, curious onlookers, and child rights activists. Veronica arrived dressed modestly, trying to appear humble and victimized, but her performance fooled no one who knew the facts of the case. Charles Henry was meticulous in his argumentation. He presented each piece of evidence, called witnesses, built a detailed timeline of events. When Mrs. Celeste took the witness stand, she emotionally described what she had observed, how her heart broke each time she saw Isabella carrying Luke on her back, cleaning the floor with bruised little hands. The doctor who treated Luke at the hospital gave a technical but impactful testimony about the children's condition when they arrived, about how Luke's malnutrition was at a critical level, about the marks of excessive work on Isabella's hands. "That doesn't happen by chance or occasional neglect," he stated. "It was the result of months of systematic and intentional abuse." Veronica's defense lawyer tried to argue that she was just trying to educate the children, that perhaps she had been too strict, but had no bad intentions. He tried to discredit Isabella's testimony, suggesting that the girl was confused or influenced by her father. But the judge interrupted that line of questioning, making it clear that he would not tolerate attacks on a child victim. Maurice was called as a prosecution witness and confirmed all the schemes. He described how they planned the scam, how Veronica instructed him to pose as a cousin, how they divided the stolen money. Under cross-examination, he admitted that he knew about the children's mistreatment, but did nothing to stop it, which also incriminated him. When it was time for Veronica to testify in her own defense, she tried to cry, tried to appear remorseful, tried to shift the blame to Maurice, saying he had influenced and manipulated her. But her stories were inconsistent, contradicted the evidence presented. The more she spoke, the more she got entangled in her own lies. The most impactful moment of the trial came when the judge requested Isabella to testify. There was debate about whether it was appropriate to expose the girl to that situation, but Dr. Marcia, after evaluating Isabella, said that the girl was prepared and even wanted to do it, felt it was important for her own healing process. Isabella took the stand with Dr. Marcia beside her, and Richard sitting in the front row, ready to support her. The judge asked questions gently, and Isabella answered with surprising calm for her age. She didn't cry, didn't get upset, just stated the facts clearly and directly. She described the days of excessive work, the nights without food, the threats Veronica made about Luke. When the defense lawyer tried to ask leading questions, insinuating that Isabella might be exaggerating, the girl looked him directly in the eyes and said something that silenced the entire room. "I don't need to exaggerate. The truth is already bad enough. And I know it's hard for adults to believe that a child can go through these things without anyone noticing, but it happens. It happened to me. And that's why I'm here, so that other children know they can speak up, that they can ask for help, that someone will believe them." There was a moment of complete silence in the courtroom. Then, spontaneously, some people in the gallery began to applaud. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order, but there were tears in his eyes. Even some journalists discreetly wiped their faces. The trial lasted 3 weeks. In the end, the jury deliberated for only 2 hours before returning with the verdict. Veronica was found guilty on all charges. The sentence was severe. In addition to the penalties for financial fraud and falsifications, she received a significant conviction for the mistreatment and neglect of the children. The judge was particularly harsh in his words when pronouncing the sentence. "You abused the trust of a grieving father, exploited vulnerable children, and caused damages that will take years to be fully healed. Your calculated coldness and complete lack of remorse demonstrate a deeply flawed character. This court not only seeks punishment but also protection. Protection for these children and for other potential victims of your schemes." Veronica was led away in handcuffs, and for the first time, her mask fell completely. There were no more false tears or theatrics, only anger and hatred in her eyes, as she was led out of the courtroom. Richard felt no satisfaction in seeing this, only a deep weariness and the relief that that chapter was finally closing. But there was still a long road ahead for the family's complete healing. The months after the trial brought a new routine for the Miller family. Richard had completely changed his priorities. The apartment where they lived during the months of terror with Veronica was put up for sale. It was impossible for Isabella to be there without reliving the traumas. They moved to a single-story house in a quiet residential neighborhood of London, with a small garden where Luke could play safely. The new house was decorated with Isabella's participation. Richard took his daughter to stores and let her choose the colors for her own room, the furniture, the curtains. He wanted her to feel that this space was truly hers, a safe place where she could just be a child. Isabella chose a light blue for the walls, with fluorescent stars on the ceiling that glowed at night, reminding her of the songs her mother used to sing about dreaming with the stars. Luke got a colorful room, full of educational toys and a comfortable crib. But frequently in the first few weeks, he would wake up crying in the middle of the night, and Isabella would run to his room even before Richard arrived. It was as if the girl still felt the responsibility of caring for her brother, a habit difficult to break. Therapy continued to be an important part of the recovery. Isabella saw Dr. Marcia twice a week, and Richard also began his own sessions with a psychologist. He needed to process the guilt he felt for having failed his children, for having been so completely deceived, for not having been present when they needed him most. One of the most painful revelations in Richard's sessions was realizing that his excessive dedication to work after Amanda's loss was not just about providing for his children. It was a form of escape. Working prevented him from feeling the pain of loss, from facing the fact that he had to be both father and mother at the same time, from dealing with his own loneliness. And in that escape, he had left an opening for someone like Veronica to come in and destroy everything. Isabella returned to school after the holidays, but was transferred to a new institution. At the old school, everyone knew the story, and although many children and parents were supportive, there were also those who asked intrusive questions or looked with pity. At the new school, only the principal and the school psychologist knew about the case, and they promised to protect Isabella's privacy. The first few days were difficult. Isabella was used to being alone, to not trusting anyone, to always being alert. Making friends seemed an impossible task. But there was a girl named Sophia, outgoing and persistent, who decided that Isabella would be her friend whether she wanted to or not. Sophia sat next to Isabella at lunch, included her in games at recess, and slowly, very slowly, Isabella's barrier began to fall. One day, weeks later, Sophia invited Isabella to a birthday party. Richard was worried, thinking it might be too soon, but Dr. Marcia encouraged him. She needs normal childhood experiences, she explained. She needs to learn to trust again, to have fun without fear. The party was at Sophia's house, and when Richard went to pick up Isabella in the late afternoon, she was smiling. A genuine, spontaneous smile, like he hadn't seen in a long time. She had played, laughed, eaten cake, been just a child for a few hours, and that was an important milestone in her recovery. Luke was also flourishing. With adequate nutrition, regular medical care, and much love, the baby was gaining weight and developing well. He had started taking his first steps, leaning on furniture and eventually letting go to take a few wobbly steps alone. Each achievement was celebrated by the family as a victory, not just for Luke, but for all of them. Richard hired a nanny named Sonia, a 50-year-old woman with decades of experience and impeccable references. But this time Richard was present. He met Sonia's family, checked every detail of her past, and made it clear that there would be security cameras in the house, constant monitoring. Sonia was not offended. In fact, she praised Richard for being so careful. A good father must be protective, she said. But Sonia would not just be a nanny. Richard also drastically reduced his workload. He promoted one of his most competent managers to partner, giving him autonomy to make decisions and lead the company in his absence. Richard limited his travels to a maximum of 3 days a month, and only for absolutely essential cases. The rest of the time he was home, present in his children's lives. Family meals became sacred. Every evening, the three sat at the table to have dinner together. Sometimes Sonia joined them, becoming almost part of the family. They talked about the day, about Isabella's school, about Luke's discoveries. Richard told funny stories from the office, and Isabella began to open up about her own feelings and experiences. One night, Isabella asked about her mother. It was a subject they had carefully avoided, but Dr. Marcia had said it was important not to hide Amanda's memory, but to celebrate it. Richard took out the photo album he had kept, afraid that seeing Amanda would cause more pain. But Isabella wanted to see. They spent hours looking at the photos, and Richard told stories about Amanda, how they met, how she laughed too loudly in public places, how she sang off-key but with so much enthusiasm that no one cared, how she loved Isabella from the first moment, how excited she was when she found out she was pregnant with Luke. "Dad, why did Mom leave?" Isabella asked, her voice small. "Was it my fault? Because I wasn't a good enough daughter." Richard felt his heart break. "No, my princess, never ever was it your fault. Your mother loved you more than anything in this world. She got very sick, an illness that doctors couldn't cure in time. She fought very hard to stay, but sometimes our body can't take it, no matter how much we love someone or how much we want to stay. Do you think she would be proud of me? After everything that happened?" Richard hugged his daughter tightly. She would be incredibly proud. "You were so brave, so strong. You protected your brother, survived things no child should ever face, and still kept your kind heart. Your mother would be radiant with pride." That conversation was cathartic for both of them. After that, Amanda was no longer a forbidden subject. Her photo was placed in the living room, and frequently Isabella would stop in front of it, telling her day to the mother who was no longer physically there, but who remained alive in her memories and in her heart. Mrs. Celeste became a constant presence in the family's life. The elderly neighbor, who had been instrumental in helping reveal the truth, was now like a grandmother to the children. She visited regularly, brought homemade cookies, taught Isabella how to crochet, and told old stories that made Luke laugh even without fully understanding. One Sunday, Richard organized a barbecue at the new house and invited people who had been important during the ordeal: Mrs. Celeste, Charles Henry and his family, Dr. Marcia, and even Sonia. It was a celebration not just of survival, but of reconstruction and hope. During the barbecue, while the children played in the garden and the adults talked, Charles pulled Richard aside. "There's something you should know," he said. Veronica filed an appeal, trying to reduce her sentence. "It won't amount to anything, we're sure of it, but she keeps insisting it was all a misunderstanding." Richard sighed. "She'll never admit what she did, will she? People like her rarely admit, but the important thing is that she's away from your children and will remain so for a long time. And Maurice, he's also serving time, though reduced by his plea bargain. You are safe now." As Richard processed this information, he watched Isabella playing with Sophia, who had been invited to the party. The two girls laughed, chased Luke, who crawled through the garden trying to escape, living a moment of pure childlike joy. This was exactly what he wanted for his children. Not just safety, but happiness. Not just survival, but a full life. That night, after everyone had left and the children were asleep, Richard sat on the living room sofa looking at the day's photos on his phone. There was so much smiling in those images, so much light. It was hard to believe that just a few months ago everything was so dark, so desperate. The healing journey was still far from over. There would be difficult moments ahead, nightmares, triggers, bad days. But for the first time since everything had begun, Richard felt they were on the right path. They were together, they were safe, and above all they were learning to live again. The house that had once been a scene of suffering was transforming into a true home, full of love, laughter, and hope for the future. Months passed and life continued its course, with a normalcy the Miller family was learning to appreciate. Isabella excelled at school, not only academically but also socially. She and Sophia had become inseparable, and frequently her friends slept over at Isabella's house on weekends. Richard observed these friendships with gratitude, knowing that every laugh, every silly game, every secret shared between the girls was a piece of childhood Isabella was finally able to live. Luke, almost 2 years old now, was a cheerful and curious child. He spoke a few words, loved playing in the garden, and had developed a special attachment to a stuffed dog Richard had bought for him. The boy had no conscious memories of what he had gone through with Veronica. He was too small when it all happened, but occasionally he showed some worrying behaviors. He would get anxious when Isabella left his sight, would cry if she took too long in the bathroom, as if he feared his sister would disappear. Dr. Marcia explained that even without conscious memories, trauma can leave emotional marks. The body and mind remember, even when we cannot articulate those memories into words. With time and much love, these reactions will diminish. But not everything was linear progress. There were difficult days. Isabella still had occasional nightmares where she was back in that apartment, cleaning non-stop, while Veronica spat peels on the floor. She would wake up in a cold sweat, and Richard would rush to her room, hugging her until the trembling stopped. Some nights he simply slept on the floor beside Isabella's bed, so she would know she wasn't alone. One day at school, an incident occurred that brought to light wounds not yet fully healed. The history teacher asked students to create a family tree as part of a family project. Isabella began to draw. She put herself and Luke, her father, her mother, who had passed away. But when Sophia asked about Veronica, if she shouldn't be there too since she had been her stepmother, Isabella froze. "She's not my family," Isabella said, her voice tense. "She never was." "But she was married to your dad," Sophia innocently insisted. "Technically she was your stepmom." Isabella felt something explode inside her. She stood up abruptly, knocking over her chair. "She's nothing. She was a bad person who hurt us. Don't talk about her." The room fell silent. The teacher quickly approached, but Isabella was already running out of the room, tears streaming down her face. She locked herself in the bathroom and stayed there, crying, until the school psychologist, who had been alerted by the teacher, came to talk to her gently. Richard was called to the school. When he arrived, he found Isabella in the psychologist's office, her eyes swollen from crying. She threw herself into her father's arms, apologizing for behaving badly. "You didn't do anything wrong, Princess," Richard comforted her. "You had an emotional reaction to something that hurt you. That's normal. You're processing very difficult things." The teacher apologized for not being more sensitive in assigning the project. Richard talked to the school administration about ways to adapt certain activities so as not to trigger Isabella's traumas. The family tree was modified so that Isabella could include whoever she considered family, not just blood or legal ties. And so she drew herself, Luke, her father, her mother who was in heaven, Mrs. Celeste, Sonia, and even Sophia, whom she considered like a sister. That incident made Richard realize that, despite all the progress, there was still a long way to go. He intensified Isabella's therapy sessions and began to participate in some of them, in family therapy. In these sessions, they worked not only on past trauma, but also on how to build a healthy future together. It was during one of these sessions that Dr. Marcia suggested something that surprised Richard. "Have you thought about dating again?" Not immediately, of course, but eventually. Richard was shocked. "Dating? After everything that happened? No way. I'm not going to risk bringing another person into my children's lives." "But you can't let the fear caused by one bad person control the rest of your life," Dr. Marcia argued. "Isabella and Luke deserve to see their father happy, deserve a healthy relationship model, and you deserve companionship, love, partnership. You just need to be very careful and honest about the process." Richard said he would think about it, but deep down he was terrified by the idea. How could he trust someone again? How would he know if the person was genuine, or just another Veronica waiting to take advantage? But fate, or perhaps life, had other plans. At work, Richard needed to hire a new project manager. Several people were interviewed, and one stood out. Marina Santos was a 35-year-old woman, an experienced professional, direct in her communication, and with an impressive resume. But what most caught Richard's attention was her transparency. During the interview, when he asked about her aspirations, Marina was sincere. "Look, Mr. Miller, I'll be honest. I'm good at what I do, and I know it. I want to grow in my career, eventually reach a director position, but I won't step over anyone to do it. I believe in hard work, in meritocracy, in building professional relationships based on mutual respect. If that aligns with what you're looking for here, great. If not, no hard feelings." Richard liked her frankness. Marina was hired and quickly proved to be as competent as she promised. But more than that, she was a genuinely good person. She treated everyone in the company with respect, from executives to cleaning staff. She had no patience for gossip or corporate political games. She was exactly the kind of integrity the company needed. Over the months, Richard and Marina developed a professional friendship that gradually became something more. It started with working lunches where they discussed projects, but little by little, the conversations drifted to personal matters. Marina was divorced, childless by choice. She had been married for 5 years to a man she discovered to be financially irresponsible and emotionally unavailable. The divorce had been painful but necessary, and she emerged from it stronger and clearer about what she wanted in life. Richard found himself anticipating conversations with Marina, smiling when he received messages from her about projects. But whenever he felt this attraction growing, panic came with it. What if Marina was like Veronica? What if she was just pretending? What if she was interested in his money and not in him as a person? It was Charles Henry, the lawyer who had become a close friend, who gave the necessary advice. "Richard, you can't live in fear forever. Veronica was an exception, not the rule. Most people are good, honest, genuine. And from what you've told me about Marina, she seems to be one of those people. But if you're insecure, go slowly. Get to know her better, and when it's time to introduce her to the children, do it gradually with total transparency." Richard decided to follow the advice. He invited Marina to dinner, outside of work context, at a quiet restaurant. During dinner, he was completely honest about his reservations, about what had happened with Veronica, about his fears. Marina listened in silence, and when Richard finished, she took his hand across the table. "Thank you for trusting me enough to share that. And I'll be equally honest. I'm not perfect. I have my flaws, my insecurities, my past. But one thing I can promise, I will never lie to you. If something isn't working, I'll say so. If I need space, I'll ask. And if you decide you're not ready for a relationship, I'll respect that. But if we decide to move forward together, it will be with total honesty." That conversation marked the official beginning of their relationship. But Richard kept his promises to go slowly. They dated for 3 months before he mentioned Marina to the children, and when the time finally came to introduce her, he sat down with Isabella and Luke and explained carefully. "Princess, Dad met someone special, a friend I like very much and who wants to meet you, but only if you're comfortable with it. I won't bring anyone into our home without your consent. And I want you to know that no matter what happens, you and Luke are my priority. Always." Isabella was quiet for a long moment. "Is she nice? She's not like that person?" Richard shook his head emphatically. "No, she's nothing like Veronica. Marina is good, she's honest, and she knows everything you've been through. She respects that and wants to go at your pace. Can I think about it?" "Of course you can. There's no rush at all." Isabella talked about it with Dr. Marcia in the next therapy session. The therapist helped her process the mixed feelings, the fear of being hurt again, but also the possibility that not all people were bad, that her father deserved to be happy, and that she also deserved to see an example of a healthy relationship. After 2 weeks of reflection, Isabella told her father she was ready to meet Marina. The first meeting was in a neutral place, a public park on a Saturday morning. Marina arrived without fanfare, dressed casually, bringing a ball to play with the children if they wanted, but without forcing anything. "Hi, Isabella." "Hi, Luke," she said with a genuine but not exaggerated smile. "Your dad told me many good things about you." She didn't try to hug them or be overly affectionate. She maintained a respectful distance, letting the children dictate the pace of interaction. Isabella observed Marina carefully throughout the morning. She observed how she spoke with respect even to Luke, who was so small, how she didn't try to buy their affection with expensive gifts or exaggerated promises, how she genuinely laughed at Luke's silly games and listened attentively when Isabella talked about school. And slowly, very slowly, Isabella began to relax. Perhaps, just perhaps, not all people were like Veronica. Perhaps there was still room to trust again, to allow someone new into their lives, without replacing the memory of their mother, but adding something new and good. It was a scary thought, but also a hopeful one, and Isabella decided to give that hope a chance. Marina's integration into the family's life was gradual and respectful. She didn't try to force a motherly role, understanding perfectly that Isabella and Luke already had a mother, even if she was no longer physically present. Marina positioned herself as a family friend, someone who genuinely cared about their well-being. Isabella appreciated this approach. Marina asked for her opinion on small things, respected when the girl needed alone time with her father, and never tried to give orders or establish rules. When she visited the house, she always brought something simple but thoughtful, a book she thought Isabella might like, an educational toy for Luke, but never in an exaggerated way, or one that seemed like an attempt to buy affection. One Saturday, Marina invited Isabella to go to an art exhibition at the Tate Modern together. Richard would stay home with Luke, giving the two women, the adult and the transitioning child, time to get to know each other better. Isabella accepted, curious but still cautious. At the museum, as they observed the paintings, Marina shared stories from her own childhood. She talked about how her parents had divorced when she was 10, how difficult it was to navigate between two homes, two sets of rules. She spoke honestly about the mistakes her parents made, but also about the love that was never lacking, even if imperfect. "You know, Isabella," Marina said, standing in front of an abstract painting full of vibrant colors, "life is kind of like this painting. Sometimes it looks like a mess of colors that don't make sense. But when you step back a little, you see there's beauty in that confusion. There's purpose. You went through terrible things, things no child should go through. But look at you now. Still standing, still kind, still able to smile. That's incredible." Isabella looked at the painting, then at Marina. "You don't think I'm broken? That there's something wrong with me because I let those things happen?" Marina knelt to be at Isabella's height. "There's nothing wrong with you. You were a child in an impossible situation. You did the best you could to protect yourself and your brother. You survived, and now you're healing. That doesn't make you broken. It makes you strong." That conversation created a bridge of trust between them. Isabella began to see Marina not as a threat or a replacement, but as an ally, someone who genuinely cared without expecting anything in return. But while life followed this positive trajectory, shadows from the past began to resurface in unexpected ways. One day, Richard received a letter at the office. It was from Veronica, written from prison. She asked to see him, saying she had important information to share, things that would affect the children's future. Richard immediately took the letter to Charles Henry. The lawyer read it carefully and shook his head. "It's probably another manipulation. She knows her situation is irreversible, so she's trying to maintain some control, some connection. My advice is to ignore it. But what if it's something really important?" Richard asked, worried. "If it is, she can communicate through lawyers. You don't need to expose yourself to her again. And you definitely don't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing she still has power over you." Richard agreed, but the letter left him uneasy. That night he talked to Marina about it. She listened attentively and then gave her opinion. "I think Charles is right, but I also understand your concern. If you decide to grant this request, don't go alone. Take Charles, and set clear boundaries. But honestly, I think you should focus your energy on the present and the future, not on giving more attention to someone who only caused pain." The advice was wise, and Richard decided to follow it. He ignored the letter, but 2 weeks later another arrived, and then another. Veronica was persistent. The letters became more insistent, insinuating that there were secrets about Amanda, Richard's late wife, that he needed to know. This went too far. Richard scheduled a meeting with Charles, and they decided to respond through legal channels, making it clear that any future communication should go through the lawyer and that in-person visits were out of the question. Charles sent a formal letter establishing these boundaries. Veronica's response came not in the form of a letter, but of action. She managed to contact a sensationalist journalist who was willing to hear her side of the story without fact-checking. An article was published online with the provocative title, "Convicted Stepmother Alleges Setup, Reveals Family Secrets." In the article, Veronica claimed that Richard had fabricated evidence, that she was innocent and was being persecuted by a powerful man who wanted to get rid of her. More disturbingly, she insinuated that the information about Amanda was not that she had simply fallen ill, but that there were secrets in the Miller family that Richard was hiding. It was all lies, of course, but the accusations were calculated to plant doubts. The article gained some traction online, shared by people who loved conspiracy theories. Richard was furious and scared. What if Isabella saw this? What if the children at school started asking questions? Charles acted quickly, filing defamation lawsuits against both Veronica and the journalist, and the outlet that published the article without proper verification. But the damage was already done. The story was on the internet being shared and commented on. Isabella really saw it. Her schoolmate, without ill intention, but without thinking of the consequences, showed her the article during recess. Isabella read Veronica's words, the lies and insinuations, and felt all the anger and pain she thought she had processed return with full force. She came home upset, threw her backpack on the floor and faced her father. "Why won't she leave us alone? Why is she still trying to hurt us?" Richard hugged his daughter, feeling his own helplessness, because people like her can't accept the consequences of their actions. They try to blame everyone but themselves. "But Isabella, you need to understand. Nothing she says now changes the truth of what happened. The people who matter know the truth. But what if other people believe her? What if they think you're bad? That I lied? Then those people don't really know us. And strangers' opinions shouldn't define who we are." But the words, however true, did not erase the pain. Isabella spent days withdrawn, her anguish visible in every movement. Marina suggested that perhaps it was time for Isabella to do something proactive, something that would give her power back. "What if you told your own story?" Marina suggested during a family dinner, not in a sensationalist way, but honestly. There are many children who go through situations of abuse and neglect. Hearing from someone who survived and is recovering can make a difference. Isabella considered the idea. She talked about it with Dr. Marcia, who thought it could be therapeutic, as long as Isabella had full control over the process. It wouldn't be about confronting Veronica or feeding the media circus. It would be about giving a voice to children who felt voiceless, and so a project was born. With the help of a child protection organization, Isabella participated in an educational video about recognizing signs of abuse and neglect. She was not fully identified, and the video was aimed at educators, parents, and other children. Isabella told her story in a simplified but honest way, emphasizing that it was not the child's fault, that asking for help was courageous, not weak, and that there was always someone willing to listen and help. The video was used in teacher training and awareness campaigns. The responses were extremely positive. Educators thanked her for having such a powerful tool. Other children who saw the video in educational contexts felt encouraged to talk about their own situations. Isabella had transformed her pain into purpose, and that was incredibly healing. But making the video also brought to the surface emotions Isabella had buried. She had a week of intense nightmares after the recording. Richard and Marina took turns staying with her during the difficult nights. Dr. Marcia temporarily increased the frequency of therapy sessions. It was during one of these particularly difficult sessions that Isabella admitted something she had never verbalized before. Sometimes I get angry with my mom for leaving us. If she were here, none of that would have happened. And then I feel terrible for being angry with someone who was sick, who didn't choose to leave. Dr. Marcia explained that it was absolutely normal to feel anger, even in situations where the person had no control. Grief is complex, full of contradictory emotions. Isabella had permission to feel anger, sadness, longing, all at the same time. It didn't make her love for her mother any less. It just made her feelings human. This revelation was liberating for Isabella. She wrote a letter to her mother, something Dr. Marcia had suggested as a therapeutic exercise. In the letter, Isabella talked about everything: the anger, the longing, the love, the fear. She told Amanda about Veronica, about the suffering, but also about the recovery. She talked about Marina, about how she was kind but would never try to replace Amanda. And she ended by saying that she was learning to live again, that she was honoring her mother's memory by choosing to be strong but gentle, courageous but vulnerable. Richard found the letter one day, left on the makeshift altar Isabella kept with Amanda's photo. He read it with tears in his eyes, impressed by the emotional depth and maturity of his daughter. Isabella had grown so much, not just in age but in wisdom and emotional strength. And while part of him wished she had never had to grow up so fast, another part was incredibly proud of the person she was becoming. The past still cast shadows, but the light of the present was growing stronger and stronger. A year had passed since Veronica's final trial. The Miller family's life had transformed in ways Richard never imagined. The house they bought, once just a refuge from trauma, was now truly a home full of life and love. The walls that had witnessed tears now echoed daily laughter. Isabella was 9 years old, almost 10. The girl had grown not only in height but in confidence. Her project to help other child victims of abuse had expanded beyond school talks. With the support of Eleanor, who funded the initiative, and the guidance of Dr. Marcia, they formally created a non-profit organization called Voice of Hope. The organization offered free psychological support for child victims of neglect and abuse, training for teachers to identify warning signs, and a telephone hotline where children could call anonymously for help. Isabella remained the young face of the organization, but now she had help. Other children who had been helped by the organization also joined, sharing their own stories, creating a peer support network. Sophia, Isabella's best friend, became a junior volunteer, helping to organize events and awareness campaigns in schools. Eleanor had, after much reflection and some carefully supervised visits, established a cautious but real relationship with Veronica. It wasn't the idealized mother-daughter relationship she had once dreamed of, but it was honest. Veronica continued to serve her sentence, but now actively participated in rehabilitation programs, gave talks to other inmates on how to recognize and break destructive patterns, and cooperated fully with researchers studying criminal behavior and paths to rehabilitation. Maurice, Veronica's former accomplice, had also undergone a transformation. Initially cynical about the rehabilitation process, he gradually began to participate in therapy groups and educational programs in prison. He contacted some of his victims, not asking for forgiveness as he understood he didn't deserve it, but offering information that could help them recover lost resources. Richard and Julia, the pediatrician, had married in a small, intimate ceremony. Julia didn't try to replace Amanda, something Richard and the children deeply appreciated. She was simply Julia, with her own place in the family. She and Isabella developed a special relationship, not of mother and daughter, but of mentor and mentee. Julia taught Isabella about medicine, about caring for others, and Isabella taught Julia about resilience and courage. Luke adored Julia, calling her Ju, and the two had special games just for them. The boy grew up healthy and happy, without shadows of the difficult past. Richard watched his son play and felt deep gratitude that Luke didn't carry conscious memories of that dark period. Mrs. Celeste, now over 70, continued to be the unofficial matriarch of the extended family that had formed around the Millers. Her house next door was an unofficial annex to Richard's house, with children running freely between the two properties. She had become an honorary grandmother, not only to Isabella and Luke, but to several other children in the neighborhood and the organization. One sunny Saturday afternoon, the family organized a special event. It was the one-year anniversary of Voice of Hope, and they had planned a celebration in the garden of the house. They invited everyone who had been part of the journey: Charles Henry and his family, Dr. Marcia, Helen and her brother Ferdinand with their niece, Sonia the nanny, Julia, Sophia and other school friends of Isabella, and of course, Eleanor. The garden was decorated with balloons and colorful streamers. There were tables with food, a small tent where children could draw, and a space where Isabella and other children helped by the organization would share their stories of overcoming adversity. Everything was carefully planned to be celebratory, but respectful, joyful but aware of the serious purpose behind the festivity. Richard was at the barbecue, talking with Charles, when he saw an unexpected figure enter through the gate. It was a man of approximately 40 years old, elegant but with a nervous expression. He approached hesitantly, and Richard recognized something familiar in his face, although he couldn't identify what. "Excuse the interruption," the man said. "My name is Daniel Cole. I read about your organization in the newspapers, and I need to talk to you." "It's about Veronica." Richard's heart quickened. There was something about that name, Daniel Cole. Then he remembered. It was one of the cases Helen had mentioned, one of Veronica's previous victims. "Of course, come in. Do you want to talk privately?" "No, actually, I think this might interest everyone here." Daniel looked around, seeing the people gathered. "I came to tell you something I recently discovered, something that changes the whole perspective." Charles approached, his lawyer's instinct on alert. "What did you discover?" Daniel took a deep breath. 6 months ago, I received a letter. It was unsigned, but from the content I realized it came from Veronica. She's serving time, but apparently she still has ways of getting messages out to the outside world. The letter was unlike anything I would expect from her. There were no threats or manipulations. It was a confession. "A confession?" Richard frowned. She told things that had never come out publicly. Details of scams she pulled, names of other victims who never reported them. But more importantly, she talked about why. Daniel took the letter from his pocket. "May I read part of it?" "Please," Charles said, ever the professional. Daniel unfolded the paper and began to read. I quote, "I spent my life believing the world owed me something. That because I had been abandoned, because I had suffered, I had the right to take from others whatever I wanted. I built an armor of anger so thick that I couldn't feel anything but it. When I hurt those children, especially Isabella and Luke, I convinced myself I was just doing what I needed to survive. But the truth is, I became exactly the kind of person who hurt me as a child. I became the abuser, and there is no excuse for that." A heavy silence fell over the group. Daniel continued, "She's not asking for forgiveness. She makes it clear in the letter that she neither expects nor deserves forgiveness. But she is offering something. Information about other scammers she met over the years, people still operating similar schemes, locations of hidden money that can be returned to victims, and most importantly, She wants to talk to psychologists, researchers, anyone who studies this type of behavior, to help them understand what leads someone to do these things, so that perhaps they can prevent others from following the same path. Richard didn't know how to feel. Part of him wanted to believe that Veronica was genuinely remorseful. Another part suspected another manipulation. Is it real? Or is it another one of her games? I had the same doubt, Daniel admitted. So I hired an investigator to verify some of the information she provided in the letter. Everything checked out. She really did provide valuable information. 2 people have been identified and are under investigation now. Money has been recovered and returned to victims. That seems legitimate. Eleanor, who had approached upon hearing the conversation, had tears in her eyes. May I see the letter? Daniel hesitated but then handed it over. Eleanor read in silence, her hands trembling. When she finished, she looked at Richard. It's her handwriting, and I can't explain it, but it feels different. More honest than anything she ever told me. Isabella, who was playing with Luke nearby, approached curiously. What are you talking about? Richard hesitated, but realized Isabella deserved to know. She was no longer a small child to be protected from every difficult truth. She had faced things no child should face and emerged stronger. She had a right to the truth. Sweetheart, it seems Veronica is changing, or at least trying to do something good now. Isabella processed this for a moment. Did she apologize? Not directly to you or to us. But she's helping to protect other people from going through what you went through. The girl remained thoughtful. Then she asked a question that surprised all the adults present. Can we visit her? What? Richard's eyes widened. Isabella, no. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. But I want to. Isabella looked at her father with that determination that had become her hallmark. Dr. Marcia always says that closure is important. And I think I need to see her. Not to forgive her, I don't know if I ever will. But to tell her how I feel. So she can see the person she tried to destroy, but who is still here, still standing. Dr. Marcia, who was nearby and had heard the conversation, approached. Richard, can I speak with you privately? They moved away from the group, and Marcia went straight to the point. I know it sounds scary, but Isabella is right. Confronting the abuser in a controlled and safe environment can be incredibly therapeutic. I'm not saying she should do it, but if she wants to, and if we prepare properly, it can be an important step in her healing. What if Veronica uses it to manipulate again, to hurt Isabella once more? That's why the controlled environment. I would be there. You would be there. It would be through glass with telephones, no physical contact. And we would stop immediately at the first sign of manipulation or discomfort from Isabella. But Richard, listen to your daughter. She is wiser than we think. Richard returned to Isabella. Are you absolutely sure about this? I am, Dad. I'm not afraid of her anymore. She doesn't have power over me anymore, but I want her to know that. I want her to see that she didn't break me. The following weeks were of intense preparation. Dr. Marcia worked with Isabella in special sessions, psychologically preparing her for the encounter. Charles Henry organized the legal aspects, ensuring that all necessary protections were in place. And Daniel, feeling responsible for having brought up that possibility, offered support in every possible way. Finally, the day arrived. Richard, Isabella, Dr. Marcia, and Charles went to the prison where Veronica was serving her sentence. The visitation room was sterile, with grey walls and a glass partition separating visitors from inmates. Isabella held her father's hand tightly as they waited. When Veronica entered on the other side of the glass, Richard barely recognized her. The elegant and manipulative woman had disappeared. In her place was someone thinner, with unkempt hair, no makeup, wearing the prison uniform. But it was in her eyes that the biggest change was visible. There was no longer that calculating coldness. There was something different. Weariness, perhaps, or the weight of a conscience that had finally caught up to her. Isabella picked up the phone on her side of the glass, and Veronica did the same. And then, in a moment that would be defining for both of them, the girl who had been a victim looked into the eyes of the woman who had tormented her and began to speak. Isabella held the phone with both hands, looking directly at Veronica through the glass. The girl who a year ago would tremble just being in that woman's presence now stood firm, ready to say what needed to be said. Veronica looked back at her. And for the first time, there was no arrogance in those eyes, only a deep and inescapable sadness. Do you know who I am?" Isabella began, her voice coming out stronger than she expected. "I do," Veronica replied, her voice hoarse, different from that melodious, manipulative one from before. "You are Isabella, the girl who suffered because of me. Not just suffered. I was tortured. You made me believe I was worthless, that it was my fault that my little brother would starve if I spoke up. You stole my childhood." The words came out with clarity, without excessive rancor, just raw truth. "I know." Veronica lowered her eyes for a moment. But Isabella didn't allow it. "No, look at me when I'm talking. You always forced me to look at you. Now it's your turn." Veronica raised her gaze, and there were tears there. Tears that seemed genuine, but Isabella wouldn't be fooled again. "You're right. I did horrible things to you and Luke. There's no excuse. There's no justification. I could tell you about my own difficult childhood, about how I was abandoned and mistreated, but that changes nothing. Many people suffer and don't become monsters. I chose to be a monster. Then why are you talking to me now? Why did you send that letter?" "Because for the first time in my life, I'm truly looking at what I did. Here in this place, without distractions, without the possibility of escape, I'm forced to face reality. And the reality is that I destroyed lives. I didn't just steal money. I broke people. I broke you. An 8-year-old child who had done nothing wrong except have a father I wanted to exploit." Isabella took a deep breath, feeling Dr. Marcia and her father beside her, giving her silent strength. "But you didn't break me completely. That's what I came to say. You tried, but I'm still here, still standing. And do you know what I'm doing now?" Veronica shook her head, waiting. "I'm helping other children. Children who went through what I went through. Children who think there's no way out, that no one will believe them, that they're to blame for their own suffering. I tell them there's hope, that they can survive, that they're not alone." Isabella leaned forward. "So you see, you wanted to destroy me, but what you did was make me stronger. You gave me a purpose." Veronica's tears now fell freely. "You are extraordinary. Stronger than I ever was. I had chances to change. I had people trying to help me, and I threw it all away. But you took the pain and turned it into something that helps other people." "It's not about you," Isabella corrected. "It never was about you. It's about all the children who suffer in silence. And as for you, I don't know if I believe you've changed. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. But it doesn't matter to me anymore. I came here not for you, but for me, to say everything I needed to say, to close this chapter." "I understand." Veronica wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Isabella, can I ask you a question?" "You can. How is Luke?" The question caught Isabella by surprise, but she answered honestly. "He's fine. Healthy, happy. He doesn't remember you. He doesn't remember the suffering. And I'm grateful for that every day. I'm glad, genuinely glad. He deserves to have a childhood that I tried to steal from him." Veronica hesitated. "And your father?" Richard, who had been observing in silence until then, took the phone from Isabella's hand. "Veronica, Richard," her voice trembled. "I'm so sorry. You trusted me. You opened your home, your life, your children to me. And You betrayed us in the worst possible way," Richard completed. "But my daughter is right. It's not about you anymore. It's about ensuring that children like Isabella and Luke are protected. That vulnerable men like I was are not exploited. And if you truly have changed, if your remorse is real, then use the time you have here to do some good. Continue helping to dismantle exploitation networks. Continue providing information that protects other people." "I will. It's the least I can do." Veronica looked from Richard to Isabella. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm not asking for it. But I want you to know that every day I wake up thinking about what I did. And every day it hurts. Not physically, but something much deeper. It's the weight of knowing I caused irreparable suffering." "Suffering doesn't have to be irreparable," Dr. Marcia interjected, taking the phone. "I'm Isabella's psychologist, and I can tell you that although she carries scars from what you did, she is healing. She is growing. She is thriving. Children are resilient in ways that adults underestimate." "Doctor," Veronica addressed her with respect, "is there any way I can help? For my own process here, for therapy, for anything, to serve a greater purpose." "Actually, yes," Marcia replied. There's a study we're doing on behavioral patterns in cases of domestic exploitation. If you're willing to participate, your contributions could help develop better detection and prevention systems. It won't reduce your sentence, and it won't erase what you did, but it can save other children from going through what Isabella went through. I'll do it. Anything, whatever it takes. Charles Henry, who had remained observing attentively, finally spoke. I'll put that in writing. A formal agreement. You cooperate completely with research, with ongoing investigations, provide all the information you possess. In return, we ensure you are receiving appropriate psychological treatment. It's not forgiveness, Veronica. It's accountability. I understand. And I accept. Isabella took the phone back one last time. There's one thing I need to know. Do you genuinely feel remorse? Or are you just trying to feel better about yourself? Veronica met the girl's eyes and held her gaze. In the first few months here, it was just self-pity. I felt sorry for myself for getting caught. But then I started having nightmares. I dreamed of you, of your tired little face, your hands bruised from so much cleaning. I dreamed of Luke crying from hunger, and I woke up remembering that they weren't just dreams. It was real. I made that happen. And that's when the real remorse began. It's not about me feeling better. It's about finally seeing the truth of what I was. The monster I was. Isabella nodded slowly. Okay, I believe you. It doesn't mean I forgive you. Maybe one day, maybe never. But I believe what you're feeling is real. Thank you for even giving me that small validation. You owed me nothing. You're right. I owe you nothing. Isabella stood up, ready to leave. But I'm a better person than you were. And part of being a better person is recognizing when someone is genuinely trying to change. So I'm going to do something for you. What? I'm going to tell Eleanor, your mother, that you're changing. That it might be worth her visiting you. I don't promise anything. That's her decision. But I'll tell her what I saw here today. My mother? Veronica was visibly shaken. She knows about everything? She knows. And she suffered a lot because of it. But she's a good person. She's helping us with the Child Protection Project. And I think she deserves to know that maybe her daughter isn't completely lost. Veronica covered her face with her free hand, sobbing. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve your kindness. It's not about deserving, Isabella said, echoing words Dr. Marcia had taught her. It's about doing what's right even when it's difficult. Goodbye, Veronica. I sincerely hope you use the time you have to do something good with your life. With that, Isabella hung up the phone, turned and walked towards the door. Richard, Dr. Marcia and Charles followed her. On the other side of the glass, Veronica remained seated, watching the girl she tried to break walk with her head held high, surrounded by people who loved and protected her. In the car, on the way back, Isabella was quiet for a long time. Then suddenly she said, Dad, I feel light. Richard looked at her in the rearview mirror. Light? Yes. Like a weight I've been carrying for so long has finally lifted from my shoulders. I can't explain it properly, but I feel free. It's closure, Dr. Marcia explained. You faced your biggest fear, said what you needed to say, and discovered that she no longer has power over you. That's incredibly liberating. I love you, Dad, Isabella said suddenly. I love Luke. I love Mrs. Celeste, Mrs. Eleanor, Dr. Marcia, everyone who helped us. And you know what else? I even thank in a strange way for the horrible experience I had. Richard almost stopped the car. What do you mean? I'm not thanking for the pain. I'll never thank for that. But I learned things. I learned that I'm strong, that I can survive, that I can use my suffering to help other people. If none of this had happened, I would just be a normal girl living a normal life. And there's nothing wrong with that. But now I have a purpose. I know why I'm here. To help children like me. To be the voice I needed to have when I was suffering. Richard had to stop the car because he was crying so much he couldn't see the road. He parked, turned in his seat and hugged his daughter tightly. You are the most incredible person I know, Princess. Your mother would be so proud. I am so proud. I know, Dad, and I'm proud of myself too. That night, back home, with Luke already asleep and Isabella brushing her teeth before bed, Richard called Eleanor. He told her about the visit, about what Veronica had said, about Isabella's request that she consider visiting her daughter. Eleanor was silent for a long time. Then she said, That girl has a heart the size of the world, doesn't she? After everything Vera did to her, she still thinks about doing something good. She does, Richard agreed. So will you consider it? I will. I don't promise anything. I need to process this. But yes, I will seriously think about it. If there's a chance, even a small one, that Vera is really changing, that I can have some kind of relationship with my daughter, I need to explore that, but carefully, very cautiously. It's what Isabella would do, Richard said. She would approach with caution but with hope. Then I'll follow her example, her 9-year-old child being my moral guide. Eleanor laughed, but it was a soft laugh, full of admiration. What a world, isn't it? Yes, what a world, Richard agreed. But at least it's a world where children like Isabella exist. That gives me hope. That night, when Isabella finally lay down, Richard sat on the edge of the bed as he did every night. Thank you, Princess, for being who you are, for teaching me so much about courage, about forgiveness, about doing what's right even when it's difficult. You're welcome, Dad. Now tell me a story? Of course. Which one do you want to hear? The one about the brave princess who saved the kingdom. Richard smiled and began to tell, improvising a story about a young princess who faced dragons and witches, not with swords or magic, but with courage and kindness. And as he told it, he watched Isabella slowly relax and fall asleep, finally at peace. 2 years passed since the prison confrontation. Isabella was now 11, a confident and articulate pre-teen who had become a national symbol of child resilience. Luke was 4, attending preschool and making friends easily. The Miller family home was a constant center of activity, love and laughter. Voice of Hope had grown exponentially. What started as a small project now operated in 8 regions across the country, with teams of psychologists, social workers, and trained volunteers. In the past 2 years, the organization had helped identify and protect over 300 children in at-risk situations, offered free therapy to hundreds of families, and trained over 2,000 teachers and professionals to recognize signs of abuse and neglect. Isabella continued to be the young face of the project, but now she had help. Other children who had been aided by the organization also joined, sharing their own stories, creating a peer support network. Sophia, Isabella's best friend, became a junior volunteer, helping to organize events and awareness campaigns in schools. Eleanor had, after much reflection and several carefully supervised visits, established a cautious but real relationship with Veronica. It wasn't the idealized mother-daughter relationship she had once dreamed of, but it was honest. Veronica continued to serve her sentence, but now actively participated in rehabilitation programs, gave talks to other inmates about recognizing and breaking destructive patterns, and cooperated fully with researchers studying criminal behavior and paths to rehabilitation. Maurice, Veronica's former accomplice, had also undergone a transformation. Initially cynical about the rehabilitation process, he gradually began to participate in therapy groups and educational programs in prison. He contacted some of his victims, not asking for forgiveness as he understood he didn't deserve it, but offering information that could help them recover lost resources. Richard and Julia, the pediatrician, had married in a small, intimate ceremony. Julia didn't try to replace Amanda, something Richard and the children deeply appreciated. She was simply Julia, with her own place in the family. She and Isabella developed a special relationship, not of mother and daughter, but of mentor and mentee. Julia taught Isabella about medicine, about caring for others, and Isabella taught Julia about resilience and courage. Luke adored Julia, calling her Ju, and the two had special games just for them. The boy grew up healthy and happy, without shadows of the difficult past. Richard observed his son play and felt profound gratitude that Luke didn't carry conscious memories of that dark period. Mrs. Celeste, now over 70, continued to be the unofficial matriarch of the extended family that had formed around the Millers. Her house next door was an unofficial annex to Richard's house, with children running freely between the two properties. She had become an honorary grandmother, not only to Isabella and Luke, but to several other children in the neighborhood and the organization. One Sunday afternoon, the family organized a large event in the garden. It was the 10-year anniversary of Voice of Hope. but also a celebration of the family they had built and the healing journey they had traveled together. The garden was full of people, children helped by the organization with their families, volunteers, professionals who worked with them, friends, neighbors. Helen and Ferdinand were there with their niece, who was now a confident teenager, who also volunteered with the organization. Daniel Cole, the man who had brought Veronica's letter years ago, had become a close friend and major donor to the organization. Charles Henry, now retired from private law practice, dedicated his time to pro bono work for Voice of Hope. Dr. Marcia, who had accompanied Isabella all these years, was there with her husband, beaming with pride for her young patient. In the center of the garden, there was a small stage where a special presentation would be made. Isabella would go up to speak, as she frequently did, but this time it would be different. She had written something special, a message that summarized everything she had learned, everything she had lived, everything she hoped for the future. When the time came, Isabella went up to the stage. Luke was in the front row, sitting on Julia's lap, clapping excitedly for his sister. Richard was beside them, holding his wife's hand, eyes shining with pride. Eleanor, Mrs. Celeste, Sophia, and so many other beloved faces watched attentively. Isabella took the microphone, looked at the gathered crowd, and began to speak. "Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Isabella Miller. I am 11 years old and I am a survivor." The audience fell silent, attentive. "A few years ago I went through experiences no child should ever go through. I was mistreated, exploited, forced to work beyond my strength, deprived of food, constantly threatened. And for a long time I thought it was my fault, that I deserved it, that I would never escape." She paused, looking at her father. "But I escaped. Not alone. I had help. From a brave neighbor who didn't stay silent when she saw something wrong. From doctors who recognized the signs. From a father who, though he made mistakes, finally opened his eyes and fought for his children. From a wonderful therapist who taught me that surviving is not enough, that I can thrive. From friends who accepted me without judgment. From people who became family not by blood, but by choice and love." Isabella looked at the audience, finding faces of other children, some who had shared their own stories with her. "And I learned something important. I am not alone. There are thousands, perhaps millions of children who suffer in silence at this very moment. Children who think no one will believe them, who are afraid to speak, who carry a burden they shouldn't carry." Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. "But I am here to say there is hope. There is a way out. There are people who care, who will believe you, who will fight for you. If you are a child going through something difficult, please be brave enough to speak up. Tell a teacher, a neighbor, a doctor, call our helpline, do something. You deserve to be happy. You deserve to be a child. You deserve to be protected." Tears streamed down the faces of many in the audience. "And if you are an adult," Isabella continued, "please pay attention. Look at the children around you. Not just your own children, but all children. If you see something wrong, speak up. Don't stay silent. Don't assume it's not your problem, because every child is our problem. Every child deserves to have someone who cares." She took a deep breath. "My journey has not been easy. I still have difficult days. I still have nightmares sometimes. I still carry scars that will never completely disappear. But I also have joy. I have love. I have purpose. I have an amazing little brother who makes me laugh every day. I have a father who learned to put family first. I have a stepmother whom I chose, who accepts me as I am. I have friends, extended family, and a cause worth fighting for." Isabella smiled, that genuine smile that illuminated her face. "And I have hope. Hope that one day no child will have to go through what I went through. Hope that we will build a world where children are protected, valued, loved. This is my dream, and I invite all of you to dream with me, to work with me, to build this world together with me." The audience erupted in applause. People stood up, some crying, others smiling, all moved by the strength and eloquence of that extraordinary girl. Richard went up to the stage and hugged his daughter tightly. Luke escaped from Julia's lap and ran to the stage too, hugging his sister's legs. And soon the whole family was there. Julia, Eleanor, Mrs. Celeste, forming a circle of love around the children who had been so deeply hurt but who now flourished. After the event, when everyone had left and the children were asleep, Richard sat on the sofa with Julia, looking at the day's photos on his phone. "I almost lost everything," he said softly. I almost lost my children. I almost let pain and loneliness blind me to what really mattered. But you didn't lose them, Julia replied, resting her head on his shoulder. You woke up in time. And look what you built together. You didn't just survive. You thrived. And you are helping hundreds of other families do the same. I'm so grateful for you, for everyone who helped us, for having a second chance to be the father my children deserve. They know it, my love. Every day they feel your love. They see your effort, and they are becoming incredible people because of it. That night, Richard did something he did every night before bed. He went into Luke's room, kissed the forehead of the boy who slept soundly, clutching his teddy bear. Then he went to Isabella's room. The girl was awake, reading a book by the light of her bedside lamp. Can't sleep, princess? I'm still excited about the day. It was amazing, wasn't it, Dad? It was perfect. And you were amazing, as always. Isabella marked the page and put the book aside. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course, anything. Do you think Mom would be proud of me? Richard felt a lump in his throat but smiled. I am absolutely sure she is incredibly proud. You have become exactly the kind of person she would expect. Strong, kind, brave, empathetic. She would love you even more if that were possible. I miss her sometimes, even though I don't remember much. I miss her too. I always will. But she lives in you, you know. In your smile, in your laughter, in the way you take care of Luke. She is here, she always has been. Isabella smiled, snuggling under the covers. Good night, Dad. I love you. I love you more, Princess. More than all the stars in the sky. Richard turned off the lamp and left, pausing at the door to look once more at his daughter. And in that moment he felt something deep and true, peace. Not the absence of problems or challenges, but the certainty that no matter what lay ahead, they would face it together. As a family, as survivors, as winners.